Welcome back, everybody, to afternoon for us and still a little bit morning for our presenters who are on the west coast of North America. And so we have a bit of a short research talk followed by a bit of a longer discussion panel type talk. We'll take a little bit of a break in between the two for questions. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, there's a little bit of a delay, so feel free to post your questions in the comment section and we'll do our best to pull them into the Q&A here on Zoom so that we can get your questions to the presenters. So I will pass it over to our presenters to continue on for the rest of this session. Thank you so much.
Taking myself off mute. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited, to do this presentation. And I will admit that the timing of this presentation has been wonderful because it has really, lit a fire under us to get this project moving forward in terms of writing up the results. And so, we originally set out to do a study looking at social media and the ways that queer women engage with content on social media related to identity, community, and alcohol use. And we'll talk about this more, COVID happened. And so we were lucky enough to get some data before COVID and then could be planful about getting data in two other waves once shelter in place happened. So that's what we're going to present on today. We're also doing, as you just mentioned, Dr. Blair, we're doing a roundtable after this talk. And so please feel free to ask us questions in chat box or whatnot. But if you want to stick around, we'll also talk more freely after this presentation.
All right, I guess we'll start. Hopefully it works. There it goes.
Well, this is us. So I'm Allison Cerezo, and this is Amy Ramirez. And so we are both affiliated with the Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology at UC Santa Barbara. And we work out of what we call the Social and Health Equity Lab, the SHE Lab. And so our research there is really focused on illuminating the lived experiences and health needs of LGBTQ women, and particularly centering race when we talk about that. And so the good majority of our work really is with Black and Latinx women. And so, we always have a racial analysis when we're talking about this, or we're always trying to pay attention to intersectionality. Okay, so some background. We started to do this study related to a fellowship that I have at UCSF, and it's for research in implementation science for equity. And so it's a really great fellowship funded by the National Institute of Health. And the goal of that fellowship is to really help folks who are in behavioral medicine, behavioral sciences, and in medicine to do work toward addressing health inequities in communities of color. And so I do that work, but I did bring the lens of doing LGBT work, and particularly among women. And so what we do know is that among, and I'm going to use queer as an umbrella term, but among queer women, that the rates of alcohol use are really high, and they're actually very concerning when we think about cardiovascular risk and other types of health outcomes. And so, oftentimes a lot of researchers talk about the way stigma or minority stress can be a key factor in, driving emotional reactivity or psychological distress that women then deal with, sometimes cope with using alcohol to offset some of the, the discomfort around facing stigma or discrimination in multiple areas of their lives. And so, we knew that already, but a big piece for us in some of the research that we have done already was the impact of social norms, peer norms for drinking. And so when I thought about, eventually getting myself to be able to do an implementation of an intervention, we were trying to really think about what kind of platform could be the most useful in terms of disseminating information. And so we thought, social media would be great because it's ubiquitous. It's ubiquitous across different age groups, but also across different racial ethnic groups. And if you, pay attention to social media in different kinds of ways, you find that there is such a thing as like Black Twitter or gay Twitter or other kinds of, communities within social media. And so we really thought about like, how can we use social media as a way to like both access community, build, like just sort of, information about what problematic drinking might be, what health risks might be, and try to create a narrative of how we can get queer women, really diverse queer women, to really pay attention to alcohol use. And so, let's see. So, so, and this was really rooted in our previous research. And then what we do know, there's this really great paper by Moreno and Whitehill from 2014. And I spoke with Dr. Moreno before we started doing this project. She had done a project related to Facebook, a few years back when Facebook was more popular, but really looking at like emerging adults and how alcohol messages on social media then impacted offline drinking behaviors. And so we were really thinking about, okay, so how do we really think about that for different kinds of sexual minority women? Okay, so our original goals. And so what we really thought about, again, was that we wanted to study the impact of social media content related to the ways that queer women, receive messages about their own identities, about their community, and about peer norms around alcohol use. And so the goal was that we were going to use concept mapping, which we have done in our project, but to really just understand like social media use and the ways that we could deliver, interventions over social media. And so what we had set out to do was have participants first just talk about what social media means to them, and then the kinds of messages conveyed to them on social media about what it means to be, like an LGBTQ woman, also just sort of what it means to be part of the larger LGBTQ community, and the ways that, that women engage with messages online about norms around like what it means to like socially drink or to drink in general, and how those are integrated with the ways that people think about queer community. And so, Amy and I, we talked a lot about, sort of, what we were going to do before we did this project. And we also, came to a realization, both of us as, identifying as part of the LGBTQ community, both of us as women of color, and the ways that we've engaged with social media. And so this is something we'll talk about in the roundtable, but we also, like for myself, I had relocated back to Los Angeles from originally from, and in trying to understand like the landscape for, for queer women in Los Angeles, it was just overwhelmingly tied to sort of a party culture. And so, this idea that like partying and drinking in particular was just really kind of held in high regard, but it was almost the way that like people built community, but it was kind of a message that like, this is what it meant to be a queer woman of color in Los Angeles. And so when we really thought about like, okay, so, we know that drinking is an issue, but how do we address that issue? We really thought about social media as being one of the platforms where we could deliver interventions. And so this study was meant to be like the first step in really being able to wrap our heads around how we would do that. Okay, so then our goals changed, right? COVID happened. And so we thought, we would collect data in the community and on campus. And so, we started first to do 2 groups on campus. And really quickly within those 2 groups, it became pretty clear to us that like campus culture, especially on our campus at UCSB, which is really like known nationally as like a party school, that campus culture was a huge piece of how queer women on our campus were really engaging with alcohol and particularly on social media. And so, we did our first 2 groups, and then campus closure just happened actually the day after our second group. And so it happened a lot faster than we had anticipated or planned for. And so, we realized like, okay, one, the college culture is pretty significant. And if we're going to mix data between college students and in the general community, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Like that wouldn't be sort of a story that we thought could be helpful to other researchers or practitioners. And so we had a really high interest in, from college students on our campus. And so we decided to really stick with that community, to really think about college students or emerging adults. And so, we knew that our intent was to be small to begin with, have a maximum of 60 participants. And so we decided to just work with our existing recruitment plan. And then just instead of moving into the community, we stayed with college students, but we did basically pre and post COVID.
Sorry. Okay. So the timeline kind of looked like this. The first two in-person focus groups were held in February, February 11th, and then in March on the 9th. And then, as Allison mentioned, like the day right after our school closed. So we ended up moving the focus groups online through Zoom. And from there, we kind of explored how alcohol-related content changed from the time before COVID and then during the quarantine. So we had two groups of focus groups. The first one held in April, so a month in, and then in May, 2 months in. And then the participants kind of look like this. So we recruited from the campus, classrooms, groups, affiliates, and then UGIG, which was an online recruitment tool that started at UCSB. We ended up with a total of 28 participants that took place in the study, and none of them repeated, so everybody was unique. Everybody was around 21, mostly undergrads with 1 graduate student and 4 people who had recently graduated. And then most of his gender identity, most people identified as women, 2 non-binary, and 1 person who identified as woman/non-binary. And then for sexual orientation, 20 people identified as bisexual, 4 as queer, 3 as lesbian, and 1 as pan. And so as you can kind of see, the sample was like mostly women, bisexual women. And then in terms of race and ethnicity, 9 white, 7 Asian or Pacific Islander, 6 Latina, 2 multiracial, and 1 Middle Eastern. And this kind of ethnic makeup is more, I guess this is what the school is kind of made. This is kind of what the school is made up of. So this is the population of UCSB. And then we had a protocol for the focus groups. So these are the questions that we asked pre-COVID. Basically like an overarching understanding of like, what does social media mean to you? What does it mean to be queer on social media, or like whatever term they use, like how does it impact what social media means to them? And then because the people who participated reported drinking on more than 1 day a week, or 1 or more days a week, then what kind of messages about alcohol or drinking had come up on their social media feed? This kind of changed as COVID became a thing. So the first 2 questions were still the same, but the third question kind of changed, where we had them more think back about like what their messages on social media about alcohol were like before COVID became a problem, and then after. So present day during the quarantine, what kind of messages about alcohol were they seeing now? And through the concept mapping process, what we did is as they were talking, we wrote down notes about like the topics or the ideas that they were having about social media and the messages that they were receiving or what it meant to them. We generated this list, and then we kind of had them rank it and put it into themes, and then from there, just like how important these themes were to the individual. And so it ended up kind of looking like this. So obviously there was one of these for every one of the focus groups. So not all of them looked like this. Everyone was kind of unique. But for this list in particular, like the first theme, social media for connection, then representation in safe space, alcohol, pre-COVID, post-COVID, platforms used to share drinking, and then culture on social media in general. And then from here, they would like rank what was most important to them. We also ended up asking them about like their social media usage and what kind of social media that they used. It seems that everybody who participated in this study used Instagram. Most people used Facebook, Snapchat, and then there's others that were less used, so Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, TikTok. But what was most interesting is that Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat have this function where you can just have these like kind of ephemeral stories, like they last about 24 hours and then they disappear. And this was interesting because a couple of the participants in the focus groups did mention that they see a lot of drinking behavior on Snapchat because it is so transcendent. Like they don't stay, so you can do dumb things and not have to worry about this, coming back as a repercussion. So these 3 being in the top is especially telling. And then we have sort of like a visual of what social media use and alcohol use was like pre-COVID, 1 month into quarantine, and then 2 months into quarantine. Pre-COVID, it seemed like people had used social media mostly for like community connection, entertainment and news, LGBT representation, showing off and dating. And then alcohol use was kind of associated with partying. 1 month into quarantine, you still see community and connection, LGBT rep and filter, but they start like putting more emphasis on filtering content. Alcohol use is now used to cope with COVID. And then 2 months into quarantine, we still see connection, LGBT rep, and then entertainment and support. And then while alcohol use is still used to cope with COVID, but it's increased in frequency.
Yeah, and so you know what Amy talked about, it was really important in that, you know, participants were talking a lot about like the ways that they use social media, like the types of platforms, right? And so safety came up, I mean, throughout all the focus groups. And so, you know, using platforms very purposely around safety, but then it did change related to COVID too. But the first thing that I would say is that when folks were talking about the ways that they use social media, especially stories, right? Like, so these stories that are temporal, they last only 24 hours, or you can delete them at any point. But it was a way that participants, like the word that they used was like flex, right? Like it was a way that that their peers would show off that they were engaging in binge drinking or heavy drinking, but as a way that like didn't necessarily you know, stay with them for a long time, right? Like these stories would be online for like 12 to 24 hours, and then they'd be deleted once the person sobered up or once it just timed out. And so participants, but they shared a good amount about how they also use different kinds of platforms in different ways. And so one of the pieces that seemed to be very, very connected to being a queer woman was the ways that participants, you know, they use Facebook to engage with like family, to engage with like older folks within their communities or their neighborhoods who didn't know that they were part of the queer community. And so they would really filter what they put there, which looks super different from what they did on Instagram, and especially different from what they did on Snapchat or Twitter. And so there's a lot of conversation about how certain platforms just allow for anonymity or just allow for them to be out in these different kinds of ways that were really important to the ways that they engage with social media. And so here, in this figure, right? So it changes in drinking. And so pre-COVID, and you know, we knew that this was really tied to UCSB. We kind of expected it, right? Like we know that our campus is described as a party school. Like it's on websites, you know, it's on blogs. Like that's what it's described as. And so pre-drinking, like one of the things that was pretty interesting that I hadn't even like, you know, assumed might be part of our data was that participants also talked about using Snapchat to kind of like maps to figure out where the parties were, but to also filter whether those parties were safe for them to attend. And so if they saw that there was data on, you know, social media being shared, especially on Snapchat related to parties like at frats or sororities, that seemed to be like where somebody who was queer or was trans was being targeted at that party, then they knew not to go there. And so that was something that we didn't know or expect, that one of the ways that you could use Snapchat to kind of just filter whether a space was comfortable or safe for you to go to as a queer person. And then 1 month into COVID, or into quarantine, it was really clear that participants on social media, drinking was very much related to just coping with COVID. And so it becomes a lot more acceptable to be more public about your drinking online. And so, you know, pre-COVID, participants talked a lot about seeing their peers drink online, like their peers flexing about their drinking. But once quarantine started happening, then it was participants sharing their own stories about drinking online too. And then once we got into the 2 months of quarantine, it seemed to be a lot more like acceptable to engage in social drinking. And so this is where folks started talking about like drinking like online. So there was one thing called like see a shot, take a shot. And so it had this ripple effect where you get tagged on a story, you know, your friends are taking shots, you get tagged on that story. So then you have to put a story up of yourself taking a shot and then tag other people. And so in that process throughout the day, you might get tagged 2, 3, 4, who knows how many other times. And then you're taking that many shots within that period of time. And then in the ways that, participants talked about just using social media, so not related to drinking, in the beginning, it seems like, social media, and this is what we were mostly interested in, right, pre-COVID, was just understanding like, where do they seek information? Where do they find community connection? And then, the ways that they like find entertainment, or the ways that they engage with like online dating. Like we were super curious about those things because we wanted to understand on which platforms and what kinds of messaging would be effective in helping participants think maybe a bit more critically about engaging in problematic alcohol use. When we get into the pre-COVID 1 month in, the drinking and the entertainment becomes a lot less prevalent. And then instead, participants talk a lot more about just connecting with folks on Zoom or connecting with folks on social media as a way to build community and to really just deal with having to be in quarantine for 1 month. Once we get to 2 months, it comes back to like TikTok, especially being used to like engage, with folks online, just to keep people like entertained when they can't necessarily go outside. And then we continue to see that folks are really looking for connection and support to deal with COVID.
And then this little graphic here is all of the themes that each group kind of endorsed. So the pre-COVID group, the 2 focus groups that were done in person, and then 1 month in and 2 months in. One of the things that you notice is that you see a bunch of stuff that they have in common. So connection is really important across the board. Community, building community, support. Sometimes you see entertainment, but what I thought was really interesting was that LGBTQ representation stayed important throughout all of the groups. So even through the quarantine, and even though we're all stuck inside and we're no longer really interacting with people face to face, we still want to see, at least our participants still wanted to see LGBTQ representation, and that was still important to them.
Yeah, can you go back one?
Sorry, yeah, sorry.
You're good. And so here, I think we already talked about it before, right? So like 1 month into quarantine, drinking is seen as a lot more acceptable. But then 2 months into quarantine, it's like, it's not even just that like drinking is acceptable, but it sort of increases with acceptability around heaviness of drinking, the amount you're drinking, the frequency that you're drinking, and there's encouragement to drink, right? Through these games, through cocktail hours. And so that participants are also not like just engaging in social drinking, but experiencing social pressure to drink.
There was also in the 2 month quarantine group, they talked a lot more about targeted ads about alcohol. So it seems like the targeted ads kind of increased a little bit as the quarantine went on, at least on their feeds.
And participants talked about feeling like because they had posted about, LGBTQ things, that they felt like those ads were coming to them specifically as part of the LGBTQ community. Okay, so next steps. So the great thing about concept mapping is that one, we got consensus within every focus group about what the themes would be, right? So we wrote notes about everything that people talked about, almost like open coding when you're doing qualitative analysis. And then we got into the step of like, okay, now of all these themes, like what is actually the most salient to you as a group, right? And so then we started, we had all the themes listed, and this is like the beauty of doing a focus group online. It actually was a lot cleaner over Zoom to do this process than it was in person. And so, so then we asked them, to come to a consensus about like what were the top, themes. And so for some groups, one group was like 8, another group had 4, so it just mattered, like it's just whatever was discussed within that group. And so the participants identified the themes themselves, and then we asked them to rank order the themes from what was the most to the least salient to them and how they engage with social media and these topics. And then we also asked them to list all the different types of social media they used and then to rank order them. And that was the slide that Amy talked about in terms of being able to see that Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat were the most frequently used across our sample. And so our next step is that we do have, every focus group was recorded. And so we are ordering transcripts this week. And so that way, we kind of have a sense of like what the themes are already, but we want to be able to add voice, right? Participants' voices. And so when they talk about how community is important to them, then we can see what that really, look like from their own voices. And then, this leg of the study is basically done, right? Because we feel like we did hit saturation. We thought that maybe we needed 40 to 60 participants, but by the end of the third group, it just seemed like, okay, we're not going to learn anything new. And so, for future steps. And so this is, Amy doing her second year project, right? Because she just finished her first year at UCSB, of doing a second year project, kind of built off of this. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So we're going to kind of focus on emerging adults, young adults, and essentially how social media can project like positive things, but it can also be a place where people can face a lot of challenges, particularly for the LGBT and particularly for those who already experience some form of mental health problem. And to see kind of how maybe the positive aspects of social media may affect them, maybe improve some symptoms, but or how some of the negative aspects of social media can become sort of a detriment.
Mm-hmm. We did get one question about my comment that the focus groups seem to be a lot easier online. And so thank you, Cindy, for posing that question. And so for us, like that process was easier related to concept mapping. So being able to get a very clear consensus of what it is that the themes were, and then which themes were the most important to people. And because we were typing them with everybody being able to see the screen, just like we're doing right now, it was great because people would like wordsmith, and correct me. And so it was awesome, so I was the person that, basically ran the groups, but Amy, I think you were in like 5 of the 6 groups, right?
Yeah, I was in all of them except one.
Yeah. And then we had 1 to 2 other RAs available too, our undergraduate RAs who were they were badass. They were so great. And so, so I was getting corrected all the time. I think the synergy probably looked somewhat different on campus, right? Because everybody had snacks, everybody had, something to drink, and it looked different. But online, I don't feel like we lost it. It just looked different. But the actual process of running the group and really making sure that everybody could understand my penmanship, and that we could do concept mapping in a way that like really spoke to what participants were talking about. That seemed to be cleaner online. Yeah, I don't know if you have a preference, but I actually liked the online better. So, okay. And so let's see. So our next steps, so what we had planned to do, is, so we were doing, first, right, like really understanding like around like social media use and its connection to identity, community, and alcohol use. And then the idea was that we would generate social media messages that we would then connect with folks who were in the focus group and people outside of that to give us some understanding of like whether they thought that the messages would be useful in helping to increase knowledge about problematic alcohol use and to maybe reduce it as well. And so, that's still part of the plan, but we probably won't do that for a minute. More immediately, we are starting to work with a couple of community-based organizations in Los Angeles, in particular the organizations that serve Black and Latinx LGBTQ communities. And so we're going to do a daily diary study, at least a first leg of it that we just got funding for, so yay. And so we'll do that for probably 7 days because we just really want to understand how will we get people to comply and complete that survey every single day. And so what the organizations have talked to me about is not just about, sort of social media use, but also like how are folks like navigating any kinds of information related to like access to health services in COVID, access to like services related to those organizations around that provide support around like food, housing, and employment, because a lot of their clients are really struggling financially and also really struggling with just access to food. And they're really afraid of losing their housing, especially in LA County, where we just went into lockdown again another 2 days ago. And so, so the idea is that, we're working with these organizations, one, to understand like a really good infrastructure of how we can get people to be compliant to complete these daily diaries. But also when we begin to disseminate information related to health risk or health protocols or getting people to drink less or any other kinds of things, we have a sense of how we can do that on social media. And then another thing that I'm doing is working with the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And so they just asked me and a couple of people to do a series of 3 webinars for queer women who need help around mental health, substance use, and resilience. And especially because we just went into lockdown again another 2 days ago. And so we're going to see, but we're really excited that we did this first study to give us a really good sense of which platform to use, what might be the most useful, and to just understand like what those messages are in general related to drinking. Okay, so thank you. So first I want to say thank you to Amy, because Amy is incredible. Has been at UCSB for 1 year and has like completely hit the ground running. And so not only is she an amazing researcher, but she also created the logo for our lab because she's also an illustrator. And then we have Adriana, Sammy, and Andrea, who have been really great, just incredible undergraduate research assistants. I was very lucky in that I taught research methods at UCSB to our undergrads. And so I was able to, basically choose some of the strongest students in the class. And so they came on, they joined our team, and they're incredible. They've really moved us forward. I also want to say thanks to the UCSF RISE program that provided funding for this study and providing just a ton of support in helping to get this study to, 1, be published, but 2, to really do what it's supposed to, which is provide pilot data to get, additional funding. And then we got a lot of support at UCSB from faculty, staff, and students. 1, that, just got the word out to us, for us, but then 2, like help us, reserve space, figure everything out that we needed to run a focus group study. And even like our IRB office, like they literally turned around that protocol to get online within 48 hours. And so Amy and I were really happy when that happened, because we, in our head, we thought like, okay, let's really see what we could do at wave 1 and wave 2. And we were super afraid of what that would look like in terms of getting permission from the university. So the fact that we got it, we're just very, very happy about that. Okay, so that was everything for our presentation. Is there anything else you want to say, Amy?
It's been an amazing journey. Even though, COVID is just, I don't know, an unfortunate thing that has happened. Getting to see this kind of data is really interesting, and I'm glad that we were able to capture it.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Oh yeah, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I see one popping up here.
Someone is jealous of your backyard.
Yeah, we're lucky in Southern California. We have a good weather. We're stuck inside, but we have some good weather.
Are there any other questions?
So people can ask, they can ask questions by using the Q&A feature, or you can also use the raise hand feature if you want to ask your question using your microphone. So either of those will work.
I know we're moving into the, the roundtable soon. Is it the same format, or does Zoom work a little bit differently where we see people?
We have it set to be the same. But we can change it if you'd like. Like we could switch over to the Zoom meeting room, which is just all the little heads, and have it more. But there's also the ability here to pull anybody in who wants to be a talking head. So we could have people put up their hands if they want to actually be in the discussion. And then that might be a great way of facilitating all the introverts who just want to spy on the discussion. And that would work so either one is fine. I will say that we are live streaming to Facebook. So if that maybe changes people's minds, I guess I don't think we can do a poll unless the poll was already programmed in advance. But we could use the chat feature or something just to find out what people would prefer. And if we want to switch over to the Zoom meeting, that's very easy to do, and we can do that. But you are getting a couple questions that you might be able to answer.
Okay.
I noticed that. So any plans to expand this research outside of campus culture and college students? Yeah, absolutely. And so, that wasn't our original idea to do it, on campus only. We kind of just wanted to get it started on campus, especially because we have a pretty diverse campus. With COVID, but I'm not even just COVID. I think just in the beginning, like we just recognized how strong the campus culture was and college culture related to drinking, that we felt like mixing that data with more like general community data just wouldn't make sense. Like, or I didn't think that it'd be, not like it would be a good or bad story, but more so like, would it actually be helpful to other researchers or to other practitioners, like in thinking about how to consider social media and drinking among their clients, and so the goal is to absolutely do that. And so we will be doing that with community-based organizations in Los Angeles to start, and part of that is connecting with them to make sure that when we do these studies, that it's reflective of community needs, but also if we can collect data that's helpful for them to continue their line of funding or the kinds of work that they want to do. So the goal is to do that in partnership with different communities first. And I see,
Regular Zoom might be better for discussion.
yeah.
There's another question.
Or
Oh, thank
comment,
you
I
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't wait to see it go to publication too. That's the hope.
Okay, so I'm gonna let's just move over to the Zoom regular Zoom room. So if you all just go to the live content channel in Slack, you'll be able to click on the Zoom meeting room instead and go in there, and we'll meet in there, and we can have more of a free-flowing discussion.
Okay, see you there.
Great. So we'll see
All
everybody
right.
there in a moment.
So I guess we leave this room, right? Okay.
Yeah.